Hi, this is Meg Riley in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and you've joined us for another episode of The VUU. Today we're excited to welcome Reverend Scotty McClennan, and we will be introducing him in a little bit. But first, let's have our regulars say hello.
Hi, I'm Joanna Fontaine Crawford. I am here in flooding Austin.
Hank Peirce in sunny Medford, Massachusetts.
Aisha Hauser in Seattle, Washington.
I'm Bob LaVallee, fiddling with the controls here in Buffalo, New York. Too much going on. Two turntables and a microphone.
It might scare you that Bob's our tech guy. So Aisha, hey, you've been hanging out with celebrities out there. Tell us the story.
Yeah, so Barack Obama's mother grew up not far from here. Before they moved to Hawaii as a youth, she lived on Mercer Island, and her parents attended East Shore Unitarian Church, where I serve. And so Maya Sortero Eng had actually first visited about 4 years ago and didn't do a service. She just came and planted a tree in honor of her mother in our memorial garden, so we called it the Obama Mama Sister Tree. And she was invited this year to do a service. So she was very gracious. I got to meet her. She did the children's story. She led a multi-generational service. Everyone hold on to your hat. She loved it. We had over capacity, actually. She was so warm and gracious and really, really, she was incredibly magnetic, and her spirit was just so extraordinary. And I'm thinking if her brother's even, oh my gosh, I can't even imagine what, I've not ever met him. So it was great. It was really quite a holiday for all of us. It was fun.
Now, does she live in the area now?
She does not. She's in Hawaii. She runs she's part of the University of Hawaii and some kind of peace, it's a long title, peace department something. She's a founder of, what she talked about was communication and peaceful dialogue, and because she talked about, sometimes people say, oh, I know who you are, and she said, and not in a very nice way, and they're not necessarily fans of my brother. She just kept referring to him as her brother, and so she talked, she talked about some interesting stories. One was on a plane, and someone turned to her and said, I know who you are, and was ready to be antagonistic, and she just engaged this gentleman in conversation, and by the end of the flight, he said, you're all right, I like you now. And she said, well, why didn't you like me before? And he said, well, I didn't know you. And so she used that as and he gave her he had something, maybe a cloth or something with the American flag. Maybe it was anyway, it was very sweet. So she inspired all of us, and now we want to try to bring her back once a year. She was so good.
So have to come and see the Obama Mama Sister Garden, right?
Yeah. Well, there's a scholarship on Mercer Island named after her mother, the Stanley Ann Dunham Scholarship. So I think I have a feeling she already comes out every year to present it to the high school senior on Mercer Island who gets it. So we're hoping to continue to tag along with that. She was great.
Well, I know lots of people tried to get the president to go to All Souls Church in D.C. Maybe after he's done with the presidency, and it won't be such an immediate story. He'll go back. Although what he wrote in his autobiography wasn't that flattering about us. All the people who think he's about to rush back haven't really maybe looked at that. Where he said he didn't really think religion should be like a cafeteria where you just pick what you wanted when you went through the line. So anyway.
Did you know there's a movie going to be made about him, and Unitarians are prominently featured, and they interviewed. Yeah, so a woman named Gloria Borland I guess she's an Obama historian, and she didn't know anything about Unitarian Universalism, and she started researching his history. And All Souls is featured. East Shore is mentioned. They interview folks at the Hawaiian Unitarian Church where his grandparents went. So it's featured more than anyone else has ever talked about what Unitarian Universalism is. So it'll be interesting.
Wow, that's interesting. So I'll just mention here Lena K. Gardner of CLF fame, and also who comes on our show quite regularly to talk about Black Lives VUU, was on Amy Goodman this morning on the Democracy Now! Show, which you can watch by going to their website, and it's today's show. Sadly, she's there because the FBI has said, again, that there's no reason for any charges against the police who killed Jamar Clark. So she wasn't there for a happy reason, but she did a great job, and I'll say I did one of the worst interviews I've ever done at Democracy Now! Because they actually read stuff and know stuff, and you kind of get used to just saying your talking points and moving on. So when people actually go deep, you kind of go, what? Because they're so unusual for the news. So I thought Lena did great, and unfortunately, I didn't know about it till it was over, but I just went and watched it at 9 when the show was over. So anyway, I commend that to people. Hank or Joanna, anything going on in your neck of the woods?
Well, I don't know if y'all have been seeing this, but there is one of those, not focus on the family, but one of those similar kind of groups is saying that this Saturday, like they're going to go and picket Targets. I don't know whether that's really going to happen, but in my congregation we have a transgender activist named Stephanie Martinez, who I just admire so much because one of the things that she does is she says, look, just my being, is just going out and being who I am is an act of social witness. And so she put out the word and she said, okay, anyone in Austin, if you see this happening, you know, at Target, I'm going to come out and I'm just going to sit down and hold up a sign that says talk to a transgender person. And she's, you know, asked to have an ally that that in case anyone needed to call the police or something. But so I'm probably going to be collared up and if that happens, accompanying her. So kind of cool.
Talk to the minister of a transgender person. Hank, what do you got?
Not too much. This coming Sunday, it is my last full sermon to the church in Milton, where I've been serving as the interim these last 2 years. You know, we've got Children's Sunday, of course, on the second Sunday in June, and then Flower Communion. But this is my my going away, and they're having a party, which, can I just say, is so nice. And you know, and once again, like, please, you know, be nice to your clergy persons. You know, we really do appreciate it. You know, we play well with others, and we appreciate all the pats on the back that we get. So that's just going to be nice. So I'm looking forward to that, and I've had a really wonderful time in Milton. So that's really it. You know, and that, as I said, I'll be heading down to Newport to perform a wedding in a little while, or a rehearsal today and a wedding tomorrow. So living sort of like Reverend Thurston Howell III. That's kind of what I'll be like with my ascot, you know.
Do a selfie with your ascot and do a selfie with your sheet cake at the party, okay?
Yeah, we'll do. Yeah.
Helmet too.
What's that?
I hope you have a pith helmet too, Hank.
Oh, that's good. Oh, I wonder if I can still get one. Oh, okay, we'll see what I can do.
Oh, Thurston. Hey, Bob, anything up in Buffalo?
One exciting thing is the Buffalo chapter of Showing Up for Racial Justice is having its very first open meeting tonight. We've been doing some great work with door-to-door canvassing, and we disrupted the Trump rally, but it's all been a little bit under the radar, and so we're really thrilled to do the radical hospitality, get more people at the table, and show up for racial justice. Wow. On a sadder note, I actually just saw an article in the Guardian of that there are, I think, 30-something cities in the country that are using the same ways to cheat the water, the lead testing levels in the water. They're using the same cheats that Flint, Michigan has been using, and unfortunately Buffalo is one of those cities. So it's time to start waving the flag on that.
Yeah, that's scary stuff.
Yeah, it's really hairy. It's really hairy.
All right, so I'm getting an echo. Somebody, Hank, and yeah, okay. So I want to introduce our guest today. I'm really excited to have him. I'm going to hold up his book. Is it backwards? Oh, good. It's backwards when I try to read it. But it's called Christ for Unitarian Universalists, a New Dialogue with Traditional Christianity, which is a radical thing to write, I think, for Unitarian Universalists. Scotty McClennan with a foreword by Harvey Cox. And I am excited to introduce my professor. Scotty McClennan, one of the things that he has been doing is helping to teach the entrepreneurial ministry class that I've been taking for the last year and a half. So it's been fun to bring in his wisdom. He spent years at Tufts as the chaplain and also at Stanford as the chaplain. And somehow as the chaplain also started teaching business ethics, which I don't quite think is a normal thing for a chaplain to do, but I'm not quite sure how that happened. He's a lawyer as well as a Unitarian Universalist minister, and he's really been out there representing us to the world. And what I love about this book is that he starts with the premise that, you know, he's spent his life in dialogue with the religious majority here in this country, Christians, and as a Christian Hindu Unitarian Universalist himself, really wanting us to get better at having conversations about Christ. Not just Jesus, the carpenter's son, but beyond that. So I'm really excited. So, Scotty, if you could share how you came to write this book.
Well, thanks, Meg. It's really wonderful to be with you and to be with everybody today. And it's been fun to do this book because it's kind of for me, an opportunity to come back to my denomination. I've written some other books that have been trade books on things like actually business and religion, but also on finding your religion for people of, you know, variety of faiths or none. But I am somebody who's struggled my whole life with having grown up as a Christian, leaving that for a while as an atheist, and then as a Hindu kind of for a while, and then coming back to Christianity, and to be able to preach in a church at Stanford, which is very diverse, but obviously in an intellectual community, using the Christian lectionary for 15 years, that is, trying to follow whatever comes up each Sunday for us to preach on, and that's not just us at Stanford, but in Christian churches all over the world. That's been a real challenge to a Unitarian Universalist. But in the process, I think I have some things to say about how to do dialogue with mainstream Christianity. And also I think we, UUs, have an awful lot to say to the world about how to rethink Christianity. And not just rethink it, we've been thinking about it for 2,000 years, we could say, or at least 200 years. So it's fun in both directions.
So Harvey Cox in the preface says that this is like an amazing moment where Christianity is being globally rethought. And do you think Unitarian Universalists have something particular to bring into the dialogue now?
Absolutely. The two things that he raises in the introduction are, number one, that we live in a much more pluralistic reality in the world, and certainly in the United States, but also that Christianity's center has moved from Europe and the US to Africa and Asia and to other parts of the world, and it's already in dialogue with Hinduism and Buddhism and Islam and other traditions in a very significant way. And people can talk of Jesus as avatar. That's actually a word that was used to mean in Hinduism, an incarnation of God, as avatar or bodhisattva, or recognize that Muslims see Jesus as the number 2 prophet, and so on. So that is going on. And at the same time, liberation theology has been going on for the last 50 years, and emanating from South America, but other parts of the world as well. Black liberation theology, women's liberation theology. And I think we have an awful lot to say, both in terms of religious pluralism and in terms of liberation. And so it's an exciting time, I think, for us UUs to re-engage with Christians.
Hey, Scotty, early in the book, you draw a distinction between Jesus, the historical figure, the great guy, and then Christ. And I was wondering if you could talk more about that here for folks who haven't had a chance to read the book yet.
Sure. Yeah, there was some dialogue I had with editors early on from Skinner House about whether this book would be titled Jesus for Unitarian Universalists or Christ for Unitarian Universalists. And I said, no, I really want it to be Christ, because that's what Christians refer to this man Jesus as the Christ, as the anointed one of God, as the Messiah, as the living Christ, in fact. Not just the historical figure that walked around 2,000 years ago, but the Christ that lives with them and walks with them on a daily basis. So if you look at it from the perspective of a biblical scholar like Marcus Borg, I think it's helpful to see the pre-Easter Jesus and the post-Easter Jesus. The pre-Easter being the historical Jesus, but the post-Easter being this person that suddenly came alive again to his disciples as a spiritual presence. And as a Unitarian Universalist, and just as who I am, I certainly don't believe in a bodily resurrection or some kind of a resuscitated body. But something happened clearly for those disciples, whether it was visions or a sense of community that they had, or dreams, or who knows what, but a very strong presence of the living Christ for them. And that's been true for people throughout the centuries. And so Christians refer to him they're not Jesusians, they're Christians. And so I think it's time for us to use that term, although, again, one of the editors at Skinner said, "Are you kidding me? We haven't talked like this since the 19th century." So maybe it's time again.
I mean, given like our strong rationalist streak as Unitarian Universalists, like how do we encounter that?
Well, we have to maintain our rationalism, and it's wonderful that we have all these strands, and the humanist strand is critical to who we are in terms of rationalism and science and so on. So it's critical to who I am. So I should say right at the outset, I don't do anything or believe in a supernatural, something that gets outside of what we know to be scientifically and rationally true. I mean, I certainly believe in the power of poetry and the arts and music and other ways to move us spiritually. But it's critical that we use our rational and scientific analysis and faculties when we approach Christ, just as we would approaching anything else.
Well, it's funny because I feel like we're in a moment, or maybe, I don't know, we're in a changing moment with the conversation about the weird binary that sort of emerges in some of our churches between humanism and theism. And I mean, how do you think, like, if people are reading that book, if people are in those churches who are having that struggle between the humanists and the theists, how would people reading your book reframe that conversation?
Well, I hope they'd reframe it by trying to get beyond that whole distinction. I mean, I want to be seen, and I believe I am fully humanist and also fully theist. So I think it's a mistake to get caught up in that. And sometimes I think we can be literalist in an ironic way, almost fundamentalist about our understanding of Christianity. Reading the Bible literally and saying that can't be. Well, I don't think the Bible should ever have been read literally, and so I don't think we should do that either. So I think we just get beyond that pretty quickly, hopefully, and talk about the metaphorical and poetic dimensions of the Bible. There's some history in it as well, and so look at what's history. There's some bad science in it because people didn't understand the world the way we do. But let's look at the tradition as a whole and how it's developed over 2,000 years.
Do you feel that people need to be given permission or need to give themselves permission to be open to more to metaphor, especially around Christ?
Absolutely. And that's, I think, where we can begin that dialogue with mainstream Christians, because a lot of them are there too. I mean, the problem with Christianity over the last 30, 40 years is it's been captured by the religious right. It's been captured by a very conservative, evangelical, fundamentalist understanding of Christianity. That isn't the Christianity that I knew when I was in college, when I was growing up, when it was Martin Luther King and Cesar Chavez and William Sloane Coffin, who was my chaplain, anti-war activist in college, and so on. That was a very liberal form of Christianity. And then somehow, by the end of the 70s, getting into the 80s with the Christian Coalition and other movements, the face of Christianity changed to conservative Christianity. And now everybody who talks about Christianity seems to be sort of assuming that, that you're anti-abortion, you're anti-gay marriage. I mean, go on and on and on. And that is not what a lot of Christians out there in the pews across America are about and what they believe and so on. So to give voice to liberal Christianity, to progressive Christianity, is critical. And I think for us UUs to be able to align ourselves with a lot of those people that are doing really important things in terms of social justice and in terms of a liberal perspective of on Christianity is critical. And then we need to figure out how to have dialogue as well with evangelicals and fundamentalists and so on. We need to be able to have dialogue in all directions, and then back out to atheists and people of other religious traditions who wonder what in the world one would be saying about Jesus anyway.
So you lay out 5 different ways that Unitarian Universalists are in relationship with Jesus and the Christ. Can you talk about those and also say which ones you see most often among Unitarian Universalists and how you see this being meaningful as metaphor, as religious center?
Right. So I try to go sort of for the jugular right at the beginning of the book and say, okay, what does it mean for Unitarian Universalists to talk about the living Christ? I mean, we can talk about Jesus as a historical figure, but what does it mean to talk about Jesus as a living Christ? And Skinner put out a good book several years ago on various Unitarian Universalist Christian views of Jesus, and there's been other sources that I have used besides my own experience to try to think about the ways UUs have felt that Jesus lives for them. And one of them is just simply companionship, a sense, almost you can imagine as you read a great novel and you kind of get into the characters and you feel those characters kind of live with you and you think about them and you wonder what they would do and how they would act and so on. So there's a sense of kind of companionship that is one way that Jesus, I think, lives for people. Another is this very strong sense in liberation theology of Jesus' presence in and with the poor. So when Jesus says late in his life, whatever you do for one of these, the least of my brothers and sisters, you do it for me in terms of social justice. A lot of people, I think UUs that I've known and worked with over the years, see Jesus in the poor and the oppressed and so on.
I need to here insert my forearm tattoo, which is Matthew 25:40. Exactly the right
passage. That's it.
It's at the core for me, even though I'm, a lapsed Catholic, but it's so fundamental.
Well, there we have it. Need I say anything more? Here's a Unitarian Universalist that lives with this tattoo on his arm and in his heart every day.
Bob, perhaps you'd like to say what that verse is.
Oh man, getting the people's Bible out. Hold on, give me a minute.
I thought you might know it by heart if you had it tattooed on your arm.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yes, yes.
The one I have memorized is a King James, and I feel like I owe it to people to do an NRSV.
I didn't mean to put you on the spot. I thought you'd know that.
You can say these and thous. It's okay. We can figure it out. Go ahead.
NRSV. It's Matthew, book 25, chapter 25. Verse 40, and the king will answer them, truly I tell you, it needs a lot of context now I say this, just as you did it to one of the least of these who are members of my family, you did it to me. But it's the parable of the sheep and the goats, where it's the final judgment, and people, so everyone goes to see the king, and they're divided, and the king turns to the group and says, when you took care of me when I was in jail, you gave me a coat when I was naked, you welcomed me when I was a stranger, and they all go, what? We never saw you. And they're like, well, when you did it to, and God says, when you did it to the least of my brothers, or my family members, now the gendered language, you did it to me. So this idea of identifying God in the poor. So.
Well, I learned something new about Bob LaVallee today. I didn't know he had that tattoo. But anyway, Scotty, you said, do I need anything to say anything more? Yes, please. Say the other 3 ways.
So that's 2, but the beauty of this is I think if you scratch any of us, these kinds of things will come up. So before we're done today, I'd love to hear what everybody across this panel feels about Jesus, and especially in the sense of this living Christ, which is a hard thing, I think, for us UUs to get into, as was said to me since the 19th century. But anyway, going on, because I see a 21st century guy with a tattoo on his arm sitting right here with us. The third is mystical experience. That is a sense of, Emerson talked about, the sense of presence and the transcendental, the romantic poets from England and so on. But often people have a very mystical connection with Jesus. Fourthly, a sense of the beloved community, that Jesus is present to us. They hear Martin Luther King, talking about the beloved community, talking about the body of Christ as that which we gather together in commitment to social justice, and we do it as Christians through this wonderful ritual called communion, which means coming together in common, which sharing bread together. So that sense of a beloved community is another way that Jesus is present, and obviously in the communion there's a sense that you're engaging in remembrance of Jesus by doing what he did with his disciples at the last Seder that they were together at. And then finally, fifthly, living in the Christian story, a sense that this saga, this myth, this metaphor of death and resurrection, of no matter how badly things go for us in our life, there's always a possibility of turning it around, of transformation. And with that, a new kind of love that Jesus spoke about, that is the thing that really is the most transformative part of it. So this living in the Christian story as your own story is another way, I think, that people feel they're living with Christ.
So my background is I'm a raised UU, but I'm here in Texas, and I went to an evangelical seminary. And there I got to know many evangelicals that are now part of this kind of new missional movement, where for them it's all about, let's see Christ not as a system of belief, but as a way of life, kind of a Zen Buddhist evangelical, and to me that I felt like, okay, with all of our talk as you use about deeds not creeds, like these are the people who could be our partners. Is that kind of, have you been seeing any of that?
Absolutely, and exactly that. As I've been a university chaplain, it's been ironic as I traced going from the 60s to now how Christianity has developed. In fact, we UUs in the college environment sometimes seem less engaged in social justice work and more internally directed to our own spirituality and our own sense of who we are, while evangelical Christians are out there really doing the work with the homeless, with the poor, looking at issues like slavery in the 21st century. I mean, really engaging and going on missions all over the world and so on. So you're right. We can learn a lot from where the evangelical Christian movement has gone in the last 10, 20 years, and join forces.
Aisha, you've been really quiet today, which is surprising. What do you think about in this conversation?
So I grew up strict Muslim, and so the idea of Jesus being, the number 2 prophet is very much what I grew up with. But my mother would always stress, Jesus is a person. Jesus is not the Son of God. Although the Muslims believe in the Immaculate Conception. And it always puzzled me. I'm like, well, if you're going that far, just take the extra leap that, he's the Son of God. But there was a clear yes to the Immaculate Conception, no to the Son of God, but very much revered for Muslims. And so this year I got to lead the Christmas Eve service for the first time. I'm not a minister. I'm a religious educator at East Shore. And interestingly enough, side note, Harvey Cox's son and grandchildren are at East Shore. We have famous relatives. Anyway, so I told the story of the virgin birth that's told in the Quran, and most people hadn't heard it. And so, it's the story of Jesus talking to his mother. She's nervous about his birth, and he's talking to her from the womb. So it's a very mystical story. It's very much about a child wanting to take care of his parent. So I do the service, and afterwards this woman, who clearly was not a UU, said to me, oh, my grandson wants to see the baby Jesus. And I almost blurted, why would the baby Jesus be here? But then instead I said, the baby Jesus is home waiting for Santa. And they both looked at me like, come that what? And anyway, so I kind of realized that after it came out of my mouth, that was a wee bit of a faux pas. Clearly we never saw that family again, but anyway, that's my Jesus stories.
Oh my God. But so important to hear from you how Jesus looked in Islam and how it looked growing up and what you struggled with in terms of, wait a minute, virgin birth and immaculate conception, why can't we go the next step? Or run it the other direction and say, why can't we as UUs understand Jesus as great prophet, great, in the Muslim tradition, and what he came with as a special message that Muslims speak of as well, of love, and what that means, and so on. And why can't we understand that indeed Jesus is way beyond our sense of what we think American Christians believe in as Jesus?
No, it's true. I always remember in my first settlement, after a few months speaking to a member of the congregation, and I sort of said, like, so how do you think things are going? And she said, things are going very well, but you do mention Jesus a lot. And I said, I went, no, actually, I don't think I've mentioned Jesus at all. I mean, I've talked about God, and she said, oh, I guess when you say God, I hear Jesus. And I said, oh, so it's you and not me. And for someone like Joanna, I also grew up as a Unitarian Universalist. I grew up in a super humanist congregation, and for me, as I became more theistic in my late teens and early 20s, for me to really find a place where at first I was really sort of resistant to doing anything that seemed Christian, and then I realized, like, sort of it was foolish, and also I sort of felt that, especially here in New England, where Christianity is so much more a larger part of our religious movement, that it was a great place for me to feel like it was. There were at that, especially in the 80s and 90s, there were a lot of folks who felt fine to embrace other religious traditions and for us to perform rituals and things, but not to do anything to do with Christianity, not to do anything with having communion. And when I first really started doing communion in Medford, and in the last four churches that I've got, the last two churches I've served the last 4 years, we've had communion, if not monthly, then at least quarterly, and how wonderful that is, and also how much a feeling of this is our tradition, for us to reclaim and to own, and to be able to put our own spin, our own understanding of it on, and really to sort of expand the sort of the larger Christian message. Let me also just say too, while I still have a chance, that. For 2 of the years I was an interim, I was serving a church that was both Unitarian Universalist and United Church of Christ. It was a United Church, and there was really something to be said for a kid who grew up, in this weird humanist church in like this weird part of Massachusetts, always sort of feeling a little bit of like the outcast, to also feel like I was part of this larger movement of Christianity, even though, like, most Christians would be like, who is this guy? What are you talking about? It really was an amazing feeling to sort of feel like that I had the right to talk and about Jesus and these other aspects of Christianity in our own particular way. It was really wonderful that I felt that and I've really enjoyed that.
So, Scotty, you've talked about how you feel that it's important to look at Christ, with a rationalist or an eye of reason. What do you say to the people who say, "Oh, well, you're just talking about, imaginary friends," and I guess some people need that, that sort of response?
Well, we do need imaginary friends, so I don't mind that if that's what we're talking about, and that's how you access Jesus. But Jesus is a very powerful presence, I think, in the ways I've described for many people, well beyond imaginary friend. When you're in real crisis, that sense of companionship. When you're out on the barricades and you have a sense of doing this with Christ as your companion, when you have those mystical moments that move you well beyond imaginary friend into a sense of a much larger presence, when you understand the power of love in your life and see Jesus as an incredible exemplar of that, and somebody who can be present to you now through others. Back to this notion of Jesus being there not just in the poor and the oppressed, but in everyone. We talk about in other traditions Buddha consciousness or Krishna consciousness, or a Jesus consciousness, a sense that that spark is within all of us to access. So if you want to call that imaginary friend, that's a pretty pathetic way of doing it, I'm afraid, but there's much broader ways of describing it.
So,
My
oh, go ahead, Aisha.
No, well, I wanted to. My introduction to knowing someone closely who's Christian, I mean, other than who I grew up with, was when I was 17. The campus Catholic chaplain, Brother Robert Clark, was so, he taught me what pluralism means for real. I hadn't heard of Unitarian Universalists when I was 17. I was still very Muslim. And I met him, and he'd have a table, and he'd have dinners once a month for everybody. And I went to Rutgers in Newark, one of the most diverse campuses in the country. So there were Muslims and Hindus and Jews and Christians, everything. And so I started talking to him, and I realized he was just asking me about myself. And I said, well, I'm Muslim, and here's why Muslims are right. And I was I'm embarrassed at my 17-year-old self. And so after my long speech about how great Islam is, I turned to him and said, well, you tell me why you think Catholicism is the only way. And he said, well, I don't think that. He said, I think there's many paths to God. And I almost fainted, and I'm like, I thought you were a clergy person. He said, well, I am. And I said, do the Catholics know about this? Does the Pope know that you're running around saying there's many paths to God? And it was quite a transformative revelation for me, and started on my path to, there are religious people who don't think their way is the only way. And it was quite powerful. And I said, one time I still keep in touch with him, and I said, one time I gave him a card. I said, if Jesus was anything like you, I can understand what all the fuss is about. I could understand that. I mean, he really lives and breathes not just kindness, but a generosity of the soul, if that makes sense. And so I did consider becoming Catholic. And actually, my husband's Jewish, and he said to me, I don't think God cares what religion you are. And Wayne married you Muslim, so you may not, unless you really deeply want to become Catholic. Don't become Catholic just because you like me. So it was also a very, kind thing to say, because I did want to become Catholic just because I liked him,
Well, that's a beautiful story, Aisha, and it makes me wonder, and Scotty, you may want to respond to Aisha too, but you're dealing with many people, or have been for a number of years, at that stage of development that Aisha just described, where maybe they've come from somewhere and suddenly they're seeing a much bigger world. And I'm curious to hear your reflections about your interactions with those students, as well as what Aisha just said.
Right. No, I think, first of all, what you said, Aisha, is so great and so true, that we don't often realize how pluralistic mainstream Christians are, including, as you're referencing Catholics, Pope Francis, who talks about other ways, to God, and also talks about atheists, being there someday and wherever the next life may be. So, and there we are. But to your point, Meg, I think we really need to realize that this is a life journey of spiritual development, and we've known this in psychology from a number of researchers for the last 40, 50 years, that we go naturally through stages of religious development, and that one of those stages, this third stage, is a kind of dependency stage that we often are in our teenage years and in college, of commitment to a charismatic or beloved leader, as you were talking about, Aisha, and a strong sense of community with other people who are in that same group with us. But later we may move into what I call an independence stage, where you're much more off on your own, trying to figure things out, trying to move amongst a variety of traditions or none. It's often an atheist stage for people. I certainly had that very strong stage in my life. Not to say that I didn't preach a number of sermons, a whole sermon series at Stanford one summer on what's right about atheism. So I don't want to be heard to be negative about atheism. There's a lot of very important dimensions to that we need to always be cognizant of. But anyway, so the independent stage is where a lot of our college students and post-college and graduate students and professors and a lot of us. I mean, I sort of think of myself as probably still pretty much at the independent stage. I sort of see the dependent stage in my life as well. Then there's an interdependent stage, which not necessarily everybody gets to, but where you're able to look at things in a variety of different ways simultaneously, maybe literally, metaphorically, Jesus as God, but not really God, et cetera, et cetera. And then finally, a mystical stage, which very few of us get to, of a sense of unity. Then it's all basically a variety of ways at the top of the spiritual mountain, after you've gone up a variety of different paths, of accessing and experiencing the same ultimate reality. So, yeah, I think we go through these stages of religious development, and we need to recognize that and recognize in our churches that we have people at all those different stages. And often what look like theological debates are simply developmental stages.
Yeah, I mean, I think you need to be careful that's because that can very easily sort of say, like, you just aren't developed enough to understand this, which I think it gets under people's skin. But I think one of the things that I definitely see sort of in all sort of religion and non-religion is this understanding of how well you understand myth and are able to understand it. And I think you see that both in sort of religious fundamentalists and in a lot of the sort of the new atheist movement, who are just unable or unwilling to really understand mythic thinking. And Nadia Bowles-Weber talks about that for a lot of folks today, it's not about is something true, is something from the scripture true, as much as does it work. So does believing in the virgin birth, is it true? Well, who cares? But does it work if it makes people understand women better as being holy and important and vessels of new life and this sort of thing? And I think it was a great sort of realization for me to understand that too, that sort of thinking around myth.
And the word true is, I think problematic, because what do we mean by true? Is a poem true? Is a great piece of art true? Is love true? Is courage true? I mean, we do all kinds of things that have truth claims on us that are not necessarily logically or scientifically true. So certainly literature, metaphor, myth, poetry, fairy tales. Let's just say fairy tales. The amount of truth in fairy tales is huge, a lot more than in simple biographical stories that are supposed to be true.
I think when you were describing the evolution of faith, one danger, I think, for Unitarian Universalists is this kind of like, oh yeah, I'm at that fifth stage. I'm at the stage of understanding that it's all one, but let's not diminish it by talking about Christianity, for instance. It's kind of like all lives matter, so don't say Black Lives Matter. It's like all faith matters, so don't say Christianity matters. But it's a really predominant, at least I experience it often, this shallower sense of claiming universal truth in our movement. So when you were saying that, I was like, that one's a little dangerous for us, because we're very likely to claim that.
And I think both you and Hank are right to point out the problem with the sort of hierarchy of, well, it's better to be at a higher stage, and we obviously, all of us Unitarians, because we have that title, are at the unity stage. Well, Obviously that's ridiculous, but also not particularly useful because stages can be misread. And I don't mean to say stages in better or worse, or that we necessarily get there. I mean, the first stage of life, and up to about age 6, a lot of these researchers have told us is kind of a magic stage, where talk about fairy tales and myths and so on. In reality, it's a different kind of reality than in the second stage, which most people get into in their school days, elementary school days, of reality. You always want to say, is there really an Easter Bunny? Is there really a Santa Claus? And so on, and that kind of reality, which is important too. But when you get to that third stage of dependence, which relates to a strong leader and a sense of community and identity and so on, that's a stage that many of us are happily in for the rest of our lives and should not be denigrated. And in fact, I think people at these so-called later stages often are missing what's most dynamic about religion, about poetry, about so much, by thinking that it's somehow better to be further along in these stages. And I don't think these stage theorists meant it that way, as it's somehow better. It's like you can read The Great Gatsby when you're 18, and you can really see how powerful the romantic story is there between Gatsby and Daisy. And then you can read it again when you're 30 and be somehow not see that part of the story, but talk about the American dream and it's the vision of hope that's in that story. And then you can read it again, in your 50s or something like that, and get a whole different perspective. And you've lost what you had when you were 18 to understand the power of the romance in that story. So is that better to have lost that? So anyway, I just think one should be careful with stage theory in general. I agree.
Scotty, are you going to be at General Assembly doing a workshop on this?
Yes, I am.
Oh, good. I will hopefully be able to be free that time. So it would be a really cool interact. I want to hear more. Thank you.
Do you know your slot?
Do I know my slot?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's on Thursday morning. No, sorry, take it back. No, it is. It's Thursday morning.
Cool. Joanna, you were trying to jump in with something? No? Bob, you were.
Oh, I was wondering, Scotty, what you think about folks like you, Reverend Ron Robinson, and Jake Morrill, who talk a lot about the missional church and who are really, I think, really living it, and they also seem to be leveraging their Christian theology as UUs as part of that idea of a missional church. I don't know a ton about the connection, but what do you think?
Well, the first thing I should say is I don't know a ton about that either. So
okay.
I don't want to speak for them or about something that I don't really know much about. But I do think if this is getting added at all, that the notion of mission, the notion of outreach, and so on is something that's we've steered away from historically because we're worried that we don't want to become proselytizers and so on. So, and I'm not sure how they play with that or use that. But
well, let me just say that our own Joanna Fontaine Crawford has also been really central in that movement. So it's not just Jake and Ron. So Joanna, you probably know more than the rest of us.
Well, I'd say, speaking for Jake and Ron, and they can come back and fuss at me later for this, I would say that for them, a lot of it is in this idea of being the hands and feet of Jesus. And again, I guess it's kind of going back to this deeds, not creeds, but also kind of turning things inside, turning what we know of church inside out, and not making it, okay, we're going to do church in the way that we always have, and we're also going to have our projects that we go out occasionally and do. That it's okay. How do you take this idea of Christ and live that out? And we definitely see the missional Christians who are doing this. And this is where I think we have this really interesting opportunity, because I see so many missional evangelicals, and where they're coming from is they are making the choice of, we're not, this whole Christianity that judges people and gets really wrapped up in what you believe, we don't want to be part of that. We're going to go out into the community, and we're not trying to convert people. Actually, one of the phrases that they use is, God's already at work in the neighborhood, we want to go join that. And as you use, I think that whole concept of let's go join the work that's already being done could be so incredibly useful for us.
And that's something I see with college students as well in the evangelical community, very few of whom want to do the old style kind of argument-based, get a debate about Jesus. Rather, let's show by example and let's try to live out what we think Jesus was about, and if that has some impact on the world, great, and if it doesn't, well, we've tried to do our best to follow in his footsteps. And so it's a lot of much more quiet evangelical forms that I'm seeing in the college environment, and along with that, a recognition of pluralism and an openness to other traditions as well. So we make a mistake when we broad brush Christianity as proselytizing in the old sense.
You know, I was in Spain for the first time last summer, and I found myself hating Christianity with a passion I'd never felt. The Inquisition felt so close there, and I hadn't expected that at all. I hadn't even thought about the Inquisition on my way to Spain, but I could just kind of feel it behind me in this horrible way, and I started, it was weird, you know, like I wanted to go see the Black Madonna because, you know, I love the Black Madonna, and I said to my 19-year-old, like, the Black Madonna is being held as a political prisoner, you know, like, and so the opulence and I had never experienced that. I mean, I grew up UU, but I just never experienced that kind of, and so but then to contrast that with what Pope Francis and this movement is doing, and I hadn't until I read Harvey Cox's thing really thought about like decentering Europe in what Christianity means, because I think that power over oppression, opulence, all of that, which is part of our history. I mean, you know, that's part of who we are, even though we were puritanical. It took me by surprise, the raw emotion of it, and it also says to me, and other people have moved on from that. So you didn't even know you were stuck there until you got to Spain. I mean, I found myself just going to all the Jewish quarters and, you know, just getting obsessed with like the Muslims and the Jews and, you know, just like, what on earth? But I think that that was totally unconscious for me, but I think that kind of lurks around thinking about Christianity for a lot of us unconsciously, that European-centered, hierarchical, judgmental Christianity. So how do you see, do you think that's true? I mean, is that just me being quirky, or have you seen other people like really that European-centered thing?
No, you're absolutely right, for me anyway. And as you were speaking, I was just imagining Pope Francis having to deal with this, because talk about opulence, you know, at the Vatican and all the rest. And he is trying to say, yeah, unfortunately that has been part of our history and who we are as Christianity. And it is not what Christ was about. And it is not what, you know, St. Francis was about and other great exemplars in Christian history. But clearly we've had we've been a military power in the Holy Roman Empire. We've had all of this opulence and so on. We've had inquisitions. We've had pogroms and holy wars of all kinds and Holocaust and so on. So this is where I think atheism and a lot of these atheist books that have been bestsellers in the New York Times for the last decade or so are really important to remind us of how badly this tradition can go and where it has gone in so many cases, and how much harm is done in the name of Christianity. And, you know, is there really more good than harm done in the name of this faith?
On that point, this weird political year, some would say heartbreaking, where you have one political leader who is spouting a whole lot of racist rhetoric and certainly not, you know, loving the least of these, and yet claiming Christianity. What is the power for religious liberals in being able to not just walk away from that, but actually reclaim Christ?
Well, it's a very important moment. In a sense, all election seasons are where religion comes to the fore, but especially now with all of the things that are being done that are so antithetical to what Jesus is about and what the Christian church at its best is about. So yes, religious people of all sorts need to step up and speak up and say what it is that this tradition has meant and should mean going forward in the future. And on the other side, you've got you've got a Jew running who looks like, you know, he might in fact overcome this Methodist Christian named Hillary Clinton. So that's an interesting dynamic. But he doesn't affirm his Judaism in a very explicit way, at least at this point. Hillary Clinton has been engaged in her Christian. I mean, she was very involved in her church growing up. She's always been a practicing Methodist Christian, and she should, I think, be speaking more from that tradition as well when pressed on it. So it's a very tricky thing as to how we deal with religion in the public sphere. But to the extent that we do, let's show the best face, not the worst face.
Scotty, we're just curious. You have cartoons behind you on the wall. Would you mind sharing why those cartoons are there?
Oh boy, you can see cartoons way back there.
Yeah.
So I'm sitting in my home office where I collect these cartoons, not for public consumption, but it happened that when I was in college, one of my roommates who wanted to be an artist was approached by a syndicate as he was graduating because he'd been doing these throwaway comic strips in the local daily, in the college paper. And they said, we think you can go national with these strips. He said, oh no, I'm a serious artist. You know, I'm not a cartoonist. And they said, well, why don't you can make a little money doing this with us for a couple of years? Why don't you try it? And he did end up going to art school eventually. But he also won the Pulitzer Prize for a comic strip named Doonesbury, which by that time had, since it came out of our college experience, had all of his roommates in the strip, you know, as it was used on campus. So there was a Scott character, and there was a Dune character named after our roommate Charlie Pillsbury, whose nickname was the Dune. So we put the Dune together with Pillsbury to create Doonesbury. But anyway, the long story short, there is a Reverend Scott character, red-haired, red-bearded, which I used to be at one point in my life, in the strip, which was my likeness, and so there is that both great privilege to walk around, you know, in relationship to Gary Trudeau and Doonesbury, but the great disadvantage of being a lifelong joke.
Well, I think it's a great form of ministry. Joanna, what?
I said a pretty good one. A pretty good one.
Pretty good joke. It's been great to have you with us. I'll once again plug this book, Christ for Unitarian Universalists. Is Skinner House talking about making a guide for a user guide? Do you know?
Yes, they are. And I've sent them a draft for a study guide, so hopefully that'll be available soon.
Study guide, that's what I couldn't think of.
Great.
Fabulous. It's been great to have you here. Next week we're talking about the Boston pipeline protests where some Unitarian Universalists were arrested, and John Gibbons will be with us, maybe some other folks too. We look forward to that. And it's been really fabulous, Scotty. Great conversation.
Thank you all very, very much.
Thank you.
Good show, yeah.
Anybody got parting words?
Ordering the book right now.
Yeah, I know, me too.
Great. Yeah, I'm thinking we can do an online version of the study guide myself. So fabulous. All right, well, thanks, everyone.
Thank you.